with more splendor. You will know.
Well, good afternoon to all of you. Nothing like creation is there to teach you about God. I've always liked that movie, Lilies of the Field, and one of the favorite passages in the Bible is where Christ told them to consider the lilies. Thank you for that special music, Jeanette. I'm sure everybody got the message. Well, this past week, the Jews celebrated Purim. And in the last week, of course, the United States military has been taking out Iran, which has everything to do, really, with the celebration of Purim in a way, which is straight out of the book of Esther. Now, as I've mentioned before, you and I live at the time of the end and have since 1895. And really have lived on the precipice of Jacob's trouble for 90 years. But what we're witnessing right now in Iran is one of two things. Either this is another example of God helping Trump completely destroy the modern day works of the modern Ahabs and Jezebels, or this is going to be a catalyst for Jacob's trouble. We'll know soon enough. But for right now, I still believe God is using Trump to completely, totally dismantle the modern works of the modern Ahabs and Jezebels. Now, this could all turn into something different than that, but until it does, I think that's what we're witnessing. And since Jerusalem is quiet, there is no king of the north, there's really no reason, or a false prophet, great false prophet, there's really no reason to believe that we're looking at the end of the end, even though we live in the end time. Now, the book of Esther and Purim, which the Jews just celebrated, is really about Satan trying to destroy Israel. When I say Israel, I'm talking about physical Israel, spiritual Israel, and the Jews, because we're all joined at the hip. We are all joined at the hip because we're all considered the people of the book, descended from Abraham, who received the promises, right? And when Satan goes after one of us, he's really going after all of us, which is why you see our people now joining forces with what they consider to be the little nation of Israel today, which is actually just one of the tribes, the Jews. And so we're witnessing world-changing events that are going to go one way or the other. Either Israel is going to be rejuvenated by Trump, or we're headed for what the Bible calls Jacob's trouble. Now, to really understand the celebration of Purim and the connection that has to everything you're witnessing, a good place to start is AI. And if you go on AI online, what it says about Purim is this. And of course, it could put it a lot of different ways, but here's one that I think pretty much summarizes it all for you. In the Bible, Purim is a festival established in the book of Esther to commemorate the deliverance of the Jewish people from a genocidal plot in the ancient Persian Empire, and that's very true. And if you've read through the book of Esther, you know the characters, right? Haman is the villain. Esther, of course, is the heroine, and Mordecai is sort of like her assistant, her cousin. And the word Purim that you hear them use today is actually a Persian word, and it's a plural form of pur, which means lots. And it has to do with throwing dice, or like a lottery, right? To try to determine who the winner is. And we'll get to that in a minute. Today, when they celebrate Purim in Israel, and you could have watched some of this online this week if you were of a mind to do so, it involves the reading of the book of Esther on the night that Purim begins, and then the reading of Esther again in the morning. The people dress up in costumes like a masquerade ball, because there's a hiddenness in the story of Esther, isn't there? I mean, the king didn't know Esther was a Jew. Haman didn't know Esther was a Jew. Nobody knew Esther was a Jew till Esther revealed it, right? Now, in Israel today, even when they celebrate Purim, they have what they call graggers. Now, we don't have anything like that, but if we did, I would encourage you to use them today. Every time they mention the name Haman in their reading of the book of Esther, these people take these noisemakers called graggers and make a lot of noise to drown out his name, which sounds like it'd probably be a lot of fun. So today, when I mention the name Haman, you want to do that or something, feel free to do so, because who wants to remember his name, right? They also eat triangular pastries like a croissant, or a turnover, because supposedly he had a hat that had 3 points on it, and so, sort of remind them again of who the villain was. And so basically there's 4 different things that they do today to celebrate Purim. They have the evening and morning reading. They send gifts to each other on that day, and it's considered proper to be involved in some kind of charitable work and eat a festive meal, which is something all of us are good at, right? So we'd fit right in with their celebration. Now today, when I mention the name Haman, like I said, if you want to make a lot of noise, it's perfectly all right. Even though we're not Jewish. Now to really understand the book of Esther, you have to go back to the book of 1 Samuel. Let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 15. Now, you're probably familiar with this chapter of the Bible, which is a description of God telling Saul to wipe out the Amalekites. And he said wipe them out completely, all of them, kill them all. Kill all their animals, kill all their babies, don't leave anything alive, God told Saul. He says, go and smite Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have and spare them not. This is verse 3. But slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. God wanted them to totally obliterate these people. But Saul didn't do it, did he? Go to verse 7. And Saul smote the Amalekite from Havilah unto the comest to Shun, that is over against Egypt, and he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people. But Saul and the people spared Agag, the king, and the best of the sheep, and so on. And so he didn't do what God said. And he tried to make excuses for what he did with the prophet Samuel, who wouldn't have any of it, and told him, no, you've disobeyed God, and God's not happy with you. And it was so serious to God that God told him he was replacing him as king. He was no longer going to be king. So this is a big deal to God, that Saul wasn't willing to wipe these people out like he told them to. And Samuel basically did for him what Saul wouldn't. And in verse 33 of 1 Samuel 15, it says, "And Samuel said, As thy sword hath made women childless, so shall thy mother be childless among women. And Samuel hewed Agag in pieces before the Lord in Gilgal." And so Samuel took a sword and chopped Agag to pieces. Now, his name is significant here. Go to Esther chapter 3 and verse 1. After these things did King Ahasuerus, this is the king of the Persian Empire at this time, promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. Stop right there, Agagite. That's a descendant of King Agag. Now, according to Jewish historians, and I'm sure the Israelites today believe this too, Saul not only spared the king, he spared the queen. And she escaped and was pregnant. And thus, by the time you read about the Persian Empire later that the Jews are dealing with, you have a descendant of Agag named Haman who's going to cause them great grief, as we all know, and as we're going to see as we read this story today out of the book of Esther, which really gives new meaning, doesn't it, to what the commandments say about visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. I mean, this is generations later that this occurred. And what we're seeing today in Iran is generations later. And probably none of it would be happening today if Saul had done what God told him anciently. If he had wiped all them people out, many of the problems that we see in the world today with the descendants of the Amalekites wouldn't be happening. God knew who they were. God told them to destroy them. They wouldn't do it. And I recently heard Tucker Carlson and some of his media friends talking about how horrible it was that the Jews were wiping out all these people in Gaza and Lebanon and now Iran, and how mercilessly they were killing people. And they forgot to mention what those people had done to the Jews on October the 7th when they were having these conversations. And some people say that if you saw the videos that they took of that massacre, you would never have any sympathy for these people ever again, which has probably got a lot to do with what our military is doing now and Israel's. They know who they're dealing with. Now, are they willing to go as far as God told Saul to go? I don't know. We're about to find out. Because if they spare these people, probably just like what happened in the days of Esther, they'll reappear. Now, the book of Esther really begins with the rebellion of Queen Vashti. Let's go to the first chapter of Esther here, beginning in verse 10. This is because the reason Esther came to be queen was because of this queen here's rebellion. On the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded, and I'm not going to try to pronounce all these names, you can read them for yourself, and the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus, which was the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look on. So everybody wanted to see the queen, right? She hadn't been in public that often. But the queen Vashti refused to come, told the king, "No way, I ain't coming," at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him. This made the king mad. If he called for you and you were the queen, you were supposed to appear. And if you didn't, you were going to be sorry. And the king said to the wise men, which knew the times, For so was the king's manner toward all that knew the law and the judgment of the Persian Empire at that time. And the next unto him was, and there's a long list of people who I'm not going to pronounce the name of either. And so he's asking all these wise men this counsel that he has, like the king's court. And what shall we do unto the queen Vashti according to the law, because she hath not performed the commandment of the king Ahasuerus by the chamberlains? And one of his chief wise men, answered before the king and the princes, Vashti the queen hath not done wrong in the king only, but also to all the princes and to all the people that are in the province of the king. For this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes when it shall be reported. The king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought in before him, but she came not. And so they were worried that all the women of the kingdom were going to follow Vashti's example and not do what the men were telling them to, right? Likewise shall the ladies of Persia and Media, which was part of the Persian Empire, this day unto all the king's princes which have heard the deed of the queen, thus shall there arise so much contempt and wrath. If it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it be not altered, that Vashti come no more before the king. And so this was going to exile her from the king's presence. Let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she. And so the king was being told here to get a different queen. And when the king's decree which he shall make shall be published throughout all his empire, for it is great, all the wives shall give to their husbands honor, both to great and small, and the saying pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of his chief counselor there. For he sent letters into all the king's provinces, and every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and that it should be published according to the language of every people. And so the king was so infuriated by this, and his wives and men so concerned, that they sent out a proclamation making sure that the men knew they were supposed to be ruling their households. Now, if this sounds like Christian doctrine to you, it's because it is. And these people weren't Christian, and so they understood this instinctively, and this really is prophetic and goes all the way back to the book of Genesis, where God told women that men would rule over them. And so when women rebel, it can cause a lot of grief. In this case, it worked out to the Jews' advantage, because the king told all the women of the empire to appear before him one by one. And Esther was living in Persia at this time with her cousin Mordecai. And so she came before the king. Now the Bible doesn't say why the king chose Esther, but Jewish historians would tell you and suggest that when Esther's turn came to go into the king, she chose, because all of them could do whatever they wanted when it was their turn, and so they had to decide for themselves how they were going to approach this opportunity they had to become queen. And she decided that what she would do when she went in there, according to these Jewish historians, was to read the love story between Jacob and Rachel, which was a lot of intense romantic feelings, according to everybody that knows anything about Jacob and Rachel, and you can read part of that in your Bible. And of course, all of us have descended from them in this room right here, most of us. And this so impressed the king, according to these Jewish historians, that caused him to choose her to be his queen. He liked that idea of having this intense romantic relationship the way Jacob and Rachel did. Now, all this time, while this is going on, Haman is plotting to destroy the Jews. And let's go to chapter 3, beginning in verse 7. Now, Haman, who had been given permission to do this by the king, because the king wasn't aware that Esther was a Jew, so the Jews really didn't mean anything to him specifically at that time, had given Haman the right to do this for political reasons, to round all these Jews up and kill them. And if that sounds familiar to you, that's because we've seen many examples in history of people wanting to wipe out the Jews, like the Holocaust. And, you know, the Iranians, who have publicly stated for a long time they wanted to kill every Jew alive, which of course included us too, because we were great Satans, supposedly. And Haman couldn't decide what day to do what the king had given him permission to do, so they decided to throw dice or have a lottery to determine what day they were going to kill all the Jews in the Persian Empire. And beginning in verse 7, it says, in the first month, that is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, and this is talking about the Jewish calendar, they cast Pur, that is the lot. In other words, dice, lottery, whatever, before Haman from day to day and from month to month to the 12th month, that is the month Adar. And so they're throwing these dice, trying to decide what day to do this. And Haman said unto King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom, and their laws are diverse from all people, like ours are, because they're God's laws, not man's. Neither keep they the king's laws, therefore it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. And so Haman's turning the king against the Jews because he's telling them that it's not profitable for them to have people around them that aren't willing to submit to their laws, who say that their laws are more significant than the laws of the Persians. And so he got permission, as you read on here, Haman did. And it says, the king took his ring from his hand and gave it unto Haman, the son of Hamadiah the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. And so when the king gave you his king with his insignia on you, that pretty much gave you the authority of the king. And so Haman now has the authority to go forth and kill all these Jews at will. And Mordecai, who is Esther's cousin, got wind of what was going on, and he was one of them that Haman was not happy with, because he wouldn't bow down to Haman or anybody else, because God tells him not to bow to anybody but him. And so Haman had Mordecai in his sights, and Mordecai goes to Esther, knowing that she's queen now, and tells Esther about this plot. And he believes that Esther can help deliver his people from this plot of Haman's. But just like Vashti wouldn't come before the king when she was commanded, it was against the law in Persia at that time for anybody to come to the king unsummoned or uninvited. And since there wasn't time to wait for an invitation from the king, Esther knew that this was dangerous. That if she was to go to the king, she could be killed just for appearing before the king unannounced. And so she told Mordecai in chapter 4, verse 15, let's go there. She said, then Esther bade them return Mordecai with this answer for our people. Go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded. So, is this what you do if you face some great trial or trouble in your life? I think it's interesting here that Esther knew that she was facing possible death, and her people were facing death. And she instinctively knew that what she needed to do at this point was to fast, and the people needed to fast. It was that serious. Their life was on the line and they knew it. Which reminds me of what it says in Joel. Let's go there real fast. Joel chapter 1 and verse 14. I believe it is. Joel chapter 1 verse 14. Because this is actually sort of prophetic for our times too. Because when the day of the Lord breaks out, which could happen at any time, or the great tribulation, Jacob's trouble, one of the things it says here, when this is all about to take place, it says, sanctify you a fast, call a solemn assembly, gather the elders and all the inhabitants of the land into the house of the Lord your God, and cry unto the Lord. And so fasting is really, although it's something we do regularly to draw closer to God, it's also something that is used to get God's attention when something really bad is about to happen to his people. And it is something all of us should think about, especially in the times that we live in, because we could face these same circumstances one of these days, and this should be our first response, just like it was Esther's. Now, there's a great scene, and I'm going to show this to you, I think, because we got a little bit of time, in a movie called One Night with the King, which really illustrates better than I can describe what this meant when Esther appeared or decided to go before the king unannounced. I mean, she's lucky that the king spared her life, because at that time, if you did this, you were dead. Hopefully you can see that. That's her running towards the palace. Can you see that? There's all the king's men with all their swords. They're all having a feast. And she breaks open the door unannounced. And they're all like in court having a big meeting, right? The way men do. As she approaches, they're going to draw their swords, ready to slice her to bits.
Someone she comes before the king. She knows. Is protocol not broken? Yes, protocol has been broken.
So this guy draws his sword, ready to kill her. She's thinking about all the things from her childhood, the way they say your life flashes before your eyes right before you die. That was Mordecai. So he's present, praying to God, hoping that the king spares her. The guy draws the sword, ready to kill her. And the king stops him, realizing that something really wrong must be going on if she was willing to put her life in jeopardy that way. Now, at this point, Esther had arranged a banquet, private banquet, with her, the king, and Haman, where she's going to reveal to the king that Haman's trying to kill her because she's a Jew. Now, the king didn't know this at the time, neither did Haman. So when Esther arranges this banquet and they all come together and she reveals that she's a Jew, this infuriates the king and shocks Haman, right? And while the king's contemplating what to do about Haman, he leaves the room for a minute, comes back, and Haman's actually attacking Esther. Well, at this point, the king orders Haman hung on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai, which is an interesting story by itself, and we're going to go there. Let's go to Esther chapter 6. Because God often brings on people what they are planning to do to his people. In Esther chapter 6 is a story about Haman's preparation for the execution of Mordecai once he had permission to kill Jews. Now, this is a good time for you to make some noise if you want to. Haman's name is going to be mentioned quite a bit in this story. Chapter 6 says, On that night, could not the king sleep? He was having trouble sleeping, and he commanded to bring the book of the records of Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai, who was Esther's cousin, had told two of the king's servants, his chamberlains, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hand on King Ahasuerus, a plot to take the king's life, and Mordecai had warned the king and revealed it to him. And the king said, What honor and dignity hath been done to Mordecai for this act of his bravery and his loyalty? Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, There is nothing done for him. Nobody ever did anything for him. Nobody honored him. Nobody even mentioned him. And the king said, Who's in the court? Now Haman was coming to the outward court of the king's house to speak unto the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. So Haman was there to get permission from the king to go ahead and hang Mordecai. And the king's reading about Mordecai's heroism and loyalty. And the king's servants said unto him, Behold, Haman standeth in the court. And the king said, Let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king said unto him, What shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor? Just as a sort of a principled question. What should I do to somebody that I want to honor? And Haman thought he was talking about him, right? He's thinking that the king's going to honor him. Now Haman thought in his heart, In whom would the king delighteth to honor more than himself, right? So this is how full of himself Haman was, right? And Haman answered the king, For the man whom the king delighteth to honor, let the royal apparel be brought which the king uses to wear, and the horses that the king rides upon, and the crown royal which is set upon his head, and let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of the one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array, Haman thinks this is going to happen to him, array that man withal whom the king delighteth to honor, and bring him on horseback to the street of the city, and proclaim him, Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor. Then the king said to Haman, Make haste, and take the apparel and the horse, as thou hast said, and do even so to Mordecai, the guy he's wanting to hang, the Jew, that sitteth at the king's gate, let nothing fail all that has spoken. Then took Haman, and he had to have been really, his countenance had to have changed a lot at this point. And he had to humble himself immediately because the king would kill him if he didn't do what he told him. So then took Haman the apparel and the horse and arrayed Mordecai and brought him on horseback through the street of the city and proclaimed before him, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor." So God had flipped the tables on this guy totally. And Mordecai came again to the king's gate. But Haman hastened to his house mourning and having his head covered. So this embarrassed Haman greatly with all of his people, because they knew that Mordecai was a Jew and that he wanted to kill him and that the king was now honoring him. And Haman told his wife and all his friends everything that had befallen him. Then said his wise men unto his wife unto him, "If Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews, before whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him, but shalt surely fall before him." So they're starting to realize that God is turning this plot to destroy the Jews back on them. And while they were yet talking with him, came the king's chamberlain and hastened to bring Haman unto the banquet that Esther had prepared. And once Esther revealed to the king that Haman was trying to kill her, that was the end of Haman. And that led to the celebration that you see the Jews celebrating every year that happened this past Tuesday. And you can read about that in chapter 9, verses 24. It says, "Because Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, descendant of King Agag, the enemy of all the Jews, had devised against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast pur, that is, the lot, to consume them and to destroy them because of that, and because of what Esther did, wherefore they called these days Purim, after the day of Pur. Therefore, for all the words of this letter, and of them that have seen concerning this matter, and which had come unto him, the Jews ordained and took upon them, and upon their seed, and upon all such as joined themselves unto them, so as it should not fail, that they would keep these 2 days, according to their writing, according to their appointed time every year." And so when you see the Jews doing this every year, it's because that's the day that they were planning on wiping them out. And I doubt that it's any coincidence that these attacks that just occurred against Iran are happening during what the Jews call the days of Purim. You can believe that's a coincidence if you want, but I have a tendency to think that's a little too coincidental to be a coincidence, right? As I said, and you know, this turning of the tables on Haman is really indicative of how God operates when it comes to his people and the deliverance of his people, and has done this many times. And there's a lot of gotcha moments throughout the pages of history in your Bible. But the biggest gotcha moment that's ever going to happen is when Christ comes back, and all these people are bowing to a Jew who they today hate with a passion, right? They might as well all be out there building gallows for Mordecai, who they're about to put on a horse and ride through the street as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, who's a Jew. Whether they understand it or whether they don't, that's what's getting ready to happen to them. The same thing that happened to Haman. God rest his soul, right? As I said, you and I, physical Israel, spiritual Israel, the Jews, are all joined at the hip in this regard, and all of us face persecution because of this. And really, a lot of people identify you and me as Jewish. I'll never forget the little lady that lived next door to me when I was living in University City, where a lot of Jews live. And they would all parade around on the Sabbath with their little hats on. And she would see me going back and forth to church on a Saturday, and she'd ask me one day, point blank, says, "Are you a Jew?" And I said, "No, I'm a Christian." Well, she'd never heard of anybody going to church on a Saturday. And I won't bore you with the details of all of that story, which really had her ready to crucify me with all of her little Baptist friends if she'd had a chance, because the animosity and the hostility that people feel towards God that's directed at Christians, true Christians, people who keep God's laws, commandments, and statutes, right, who are separate from the world, and even people like physical Israel who espouses Christ in the Bible, people of the book, is really directed at God and Christ. And Christ predicted this and told us it was all going to happen. And so it shouldn't surprise any of us that we are grouped in that way, or that we receive that kind of persecution. Go to Matthew chapter 5 and what's called the Sermon on the Mount. Christ was very open and blunt about what was going to happen to all of us in this regard when he said in verse 10 of chapter 5 of the Sermon on the Mount, and this is not how we think of being blessed, right? It says blessed, this is called the Beatitudes. This means you're blessed if this happens to you. It's probably not how we would choose to be blessed, but this is what God says means you're blessed. It says, blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake. In other words, because you're of God, because you're keeping God's commandments, you're not part of the world, you're not living as they are, you're living differently than they are, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. And that's why they're doing it, because you're of God. The hostility is really directed at God. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so persecuted they the prophets which were before thee. So all of this that's directed at the Jews, at us, at our nation, is really nothing new, and is really directed at Christ, who is God. And so the hostility they have for God manifests itself in the person of Jesus Christ, and through Christ, us as Christians. Now in Luke chapter 21, let's go there. When Christ was talking about the end times, which is the times we're all living in, he singled us out for this persecution eventually. And this happened, of course, to the apostles in the early church. In verse 12, it says, before the great tribulation, before all the things that he said were going to happen, that were going to bring about the end of this age, before all these things, they shall lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and to the prisons, being brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. And he said, don't worry about it, what to say. You'll know when the time comes. Now, that happened, of course, to the apostles and all them. But this is talking about the end time here. And so this is a prediction that this is going to happen again in our time. Or it wouldn't have put it in this context, right? Of course, they lived in that time too, to some extent, although they didn't live at the time that this is talking about, where it says one stone won't be left upon another to the temple. That's talking about the end of the end. And so we can expect persecution in a, more significant way as things come to a conclusion in this world. And so all this stuff you see going on today, which is to combat the hostility towards God, will end with great persecution of God's people, whoever they are, whether it's our nation physically, the church spiritually, or the Jews who are just identified with all of us because of their keeping of the Sabbath and the stuff like that, which most people don't do. Now, in John chapter 5, verse 16, Christ again made it about as plain as it could be made about what our destiny and our fate is in that regard, when he said, or that isn't the one I want. Go to 15 chapter, or John chapter 15, in verse 20. He says again, remember the word that I said unto you, the servant is not greater than his Lord. If they have persecuted me, and they persecuted him greatly, didn't they? If they have persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If you're my follower, if you're a Christian, if you're doing what I tell you, they're going to come after you. If they have kept my saying, they will keep yours also. But all these things will they do unto you for my name's sake, because they know not him that sent him. Now, all of you are familiar, I'm sure, with the Holocaust that occurred during World War II with the Jews at the hands of Hitler. And there have been other examples in history where the Jews have been persecuted. And Christ is here telling all of us that you can expect this. This is par for the course for people that are filled with this enmity and hostility for God, which is really directed at us and the Jews because of that. The Jews called the slaughter during World War II the Holocaust because they couldn't think of it any other way. The word Holocaust means burnt offering. To them, they had become a sacrifice for God's honor and God's, as a witness against all these people of their hostility towards God. Otherwise, it would have been just too horrible to deal with mentally and emotionally. And Christ is telling all of us in these passages to expect this. And really, your sacrifice, if that's what it comes to at the time, is for the same reason, as a witness against them. And God always has the last say. All those Jews are coming up in the resurrection who were in the Holocaust, right? All the Jews that have been persecuted down through the ages, all the Christians who have been martyred and killed, they're all coming up. And a lot of these people are going to be bound before them the way they are Christ the Jew. And so it's not something that God's not totally aware of. Now, I wore this tie again today because it's got this eagle on it. And as I explained to you a few weeks ago, God uses this image of this eagle to describe how he delivers his people often. As I explained in the book of Ezekiel a few weeks ago, it was a great eagle that God transported the king's daughters on to the British Isles whenever he was reestablishing the throne of David there anciently compared to our time anyway, not that long ago really. And you can read in the book of Exodus how God delivered Israel from Egypt on the wings of a great eagle. And then when you get to Revelation chapter 12, let's go there. God again uses this image of this great eagle and how he's going to deliver his people on the wings of this eagle, which we know is not literal. God's not going to literally give you a ride on the back of an eagle, is he? But it describes there exactly what that means. Now, the first part of chapter 12 is a description of physical Israel. They brought forth the man-child, which was all of our ancestors, and how God was going to protect them in the wilderness, it says, where it says he has a place prepared for them that they should feed her 3,260 days, which of course is 1,260 days, which we know is the period of the Great Tribulation as well. But if you use a day for a year, which is a principle that they use in Bible prophecy, from 325 AD, and remember this is talking about the physical descendants of Israel and how Satan is coming after the one who brought forth the man-child, the physical nation of Israel. From 325 AD, which was the Council of Nicaea and the stabbing of God's law in its heart, until 1585, when Queen Elizabeth was crowned in England, which pretty much broke the hold of the Great Falls Church over the English-speaking world was exactly 1,260 years, which is, again, way too coincidental to be a coincidence, and really is a fulfillment of what this is talking about here. Physical Israel. And if you look at what this says, it says, and did cast them to the earth, and the dragon, was ready to devour them. She brings forth a man-child. And it's really talking about the earth helping them. God, the earth's a big place. And so our people at that time, after the persecution of the church and everything that went along with that, basically, and you can read about this in the pages of European history with the Waldenses, I can't pronounce their name. Anyway, people who you can trace the history of that were going through the hills and valleys of Europe, escaping the persecuting powers of the Great Falls Church, and eventually ending up, all gathered together under the English throne. And God used the earth to help them do that, like on the wings of a great eagle, right? As if he had delivered them from one place to another. And if you've read the rest of this, and I'm running out of time here, so I'm not going to read all this. If you read the rest of this, it's talking about the church, which eventually comes under this same persecution by this same power. And God again uses that imagery. At the end of this, it says, and the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time, and times and half a time from the face of the serpent. This is talking about physical Israel and spiritual Israel, because it says it's the woman who gave birth to the man-child. And eventually, when you get to verse 17, he turns completely on the church, because he realizes that he's not going to be successful in wiping out physical Israel, which is really what he wants to do, wipe out the whole knowledge of God from the planet. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and in this case, the woman is the church, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which is all of us, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. That's us. So eventually, Satan's wrath is going to be turned completely on us. But just like God delivered our people in the past on the wings of a great eagle, he will at that time deliver our people again. We will worship a miracle-working God, or worship a miracle-working God. Sometimes he delivers his people right where they are. Sometimes he moves them from one place to another, like on the wings of a great eagle. But irregardless of how he delivers you, and whether that doesn't occur until your resurrection and they're bowing at your feet, God will rescue his people and deliver them like he did Esther and the Jews in their day. I encourage all of you to expect the deliverance of God in your life as we wait on Christ to rule all nations.